Welcome to our first traffic scenario. I'm going to give you a realistic scenario that happened to me in the traffic pattern a couple days ago. I'm going to ask you to pause it at certain times and then have you guys figure out how you guys would work the pattern, what phraseology you'd use, how you tell the aircraft what you need to tell them, and how to make it as efficient as possible. Aircraft are going to be represented by different colors. T-38s are going to be in red, F-16s are going to be in green, and then C-12s are going to be in blue. So how the traffic scenario started is that a T-38 about 2 mile final for a touch and go. Followed 5 miles in trail was a T-38 requesting a circling approach on initial contact. So what I did was, so what I want you to do is I want you to think about how are you going to accommodate this aircraft and then how you're going to do the least impact as possible to this first aircraft. So I'm going to ask you to go ahead and pause the video and tell me how you would do this. What I wound up doing is I told this aircraft to make a north reentry on the go and told them traffic T-38, 5 mile final, runway 23 left, circle to 5 right. I told this aircraft circle south of the field for a right base, runway 5 right, report commencing circle. He let me know when he was doing a circle. I told him to report right base, runway 5 right. Okay, so advance this scenario along. T-38 now is in the base turn for 5 right. This T-38's about mid-field downwind on a north reentry. And then Sport inbounded me an F-16 10 mile final. Again, I want you to pause the video and I want you to tell me how what phraseology you're going to use to these aircraft that are involved here, and then how you're going to ensure separation exists as efficiently as possible. So again, go ahead and pause the video and tell me what you would do. So let me tell you how I did this. He was in the base turn. He was in the downwind, and the F-16 was 10 mile final. On initial contact, I told the F-16, zoom 17, traffic T-38, opposite direction, right base, runway 5 right. And then I told this aircraft, and I told him to report 5 mile final. I told this aircraft, traffic F-16, opposite direction, 10 mile final, runway 23 left, runway 5 right, wind calm, clear touch and go. I told him on the go, expect a south reentry. So what happened is the aircraft read that back. I told additionally this T-38, follow F-16, 10 mile final, I'll call your base turn. At this point, it actually wound up working out differently. So by the time everything did what it needed to do, I had this aircraft, C-12, or the T-38 was now on a 10 mile base. The F-16 was about 6 mile final. 6 mile final, 6 to 7 mile final. And the T-38 on the go was midfield. Okay, and then I also was inbounded a C-12, and that C-12 was probably about 15 miles out here. So what I did in this scenario, how would you work it? What would you do here with this T-38? What would you do with the F-16? This T-38, how would you make it work? So right now, go ahead and pause that video and let me know what you would do. So now that you're back, I'm curious to see what your answers were. What I did is I told this aircraft on the go, if you'd like to be number 1 inside the F-16 6 mile final, can you turn a tight base mid-lake bed? He said he could. So he came out here and did a tight base. I next went back and told the F-16, number 2 to follow T-38, approaching a mid-lake bed left base. Told this T-38 to follow the F-16, and then C-12 on initial contact, I gave them traffic on that T-38. Now, as the scenario progresses, he did his touch and go. The T-38 here did his touch and go. Actually, correction, he was a full stop. He full stopped and was off the runway. So he's now gone. Our F-16 was on the go, requesting high key. This T-38 now is probably about mid-lake bed. Okay. And the C-12 progressed a little bit, but still was about 10-mile final at this point. So F-16 is going to go to high key. C-38 about mid-lake bed. Now, what happened here, T-38 mid-lake bed, and this C-12 is going down to runway 23 left for touch and goes. So he's not going to 23 right. And again, he's probably about 7 miles or so in trail of the T-38. At this point, the T-38 requests a circling approach to runway 23 left. And so, well, actually, we just requested a circle. I had to specify, verify you want to circle to runway 23 left or you want to circle to 5 right. And what he said was he'd like to circle to runway 23 left. So in case you don't know what that means, a circling approach to the same runway, it's not defined. So he could start a circling approach right here. All that means is when you do a circling approach, you are going down final, and if we were to look at the runway, we'll just say this is the landing surface right here. Okay? And we're going to look at this from a side view, and you have an aircraft that's coming down to the runway. Okay, they're using the instruments, and we're going to call this the cloud layer right here. Okay? They're not rocks, those are actually clouds. So, they're going to descend using instruments to get below the cloud layer, once they get here, on the instrument runway that's available. So we'll just say that the winds are actually blowing in this direction, okay? So we'll use blue for that. So the winds are actually blowing in this direction. That means we're landing on this runway, okay? So the rest of the traffic pattern is going to be going this way. But maybe we don't have an instrument approach to that runway. So what they're going to do is they're going to come down, and as soon as they get below the cloud layer and they get the runway in sight, okay, they're going to then circle, right? They're going to go into the traffic pattern. It's not at a set pattern specifically. And then they're going to come and do the approach to the landing runway. Okay, so that's what a circling approach is. It is not clearly defined on how they're going to do the circle, to which runway they're going to do the circle. When they do a circling approach to the same runway that the landing traffic is going down to, okay, so we have our cloud layer here, we have our aircraft descending down there, and we have our landing runway. The instrument approach, what they're doing is they're getting down until they get below that cloud layer, and once they have the runway in sight, they may not be set up for landing 100% on this approach, right? Maybe the angle's wrong, maybe they have too much of a headwind or tailwind, depending on how they're at. And so what they want to do is they want to be able to, once they get the runway in sight, to then circle and turn a regular base, okay? So that's what I had to identify first. So now that you know that, we have the F-16, he wants to go to high key. We have this aircraft on final, T-38, that wants to do a circling approach. And we have behind him a C-12 on final, 10 miles, 7 miles in trail of this aircraft. So now, go ahead and pause that video and let me know what you would do. All right, now that you're unpaused, what we wound up doing is told the F-16 to go to high key, follow C-12, 10 mile final. Told this T-38, circle south of the field for a left base, runway 22 left, or 23 left, report commencing circle. I also said traffic, C-12, 10 mile final. That will ensure this aircraft doesn't mess around. He did his circling approach, and that's where we were at, right? So he does his approach into here, and then I have the F-16 en route to high key. So that was basically what happened. He wound up doing a full stop. What I should have probably did, it was a little bit tight with the C-12, but what I should have asked is his type landing, and then did something with that. I also told the C-12 to reduce the slowest practical airspeed on final. And so he said he was slowing. He went from about 210 knots or so down to 170. And so that gave me quite a bit of time. And it actually worked out that he got slow enough that the F-16 was able to come up here and do an approach, an SFO approach, prior to the C-12 coming inbound. So again, how that would have looked is the F-16 went to high key. Once it looked like maybe he could fit, I told F-16, the Zoom 7-1, number one inside of a C-12, he's like 5 mile final. And so when he was at high key. So he descended to low key. The T-38 was no longer a factor. My next call, as soon as he went from high key to low key, was Cobra 1-2, follow F-16 high key to low key. So that's how that scenario played out. It wasn't a super complicated scenario, but what was a critical thing in this scenario was that we had twice aircraft requested inside our class Delta for a circling approach. And we don't always have a lot of time to think about how we're going to accommodate that. It was interesting that one wanted to circle to 5 and the other one wanted to circle to runway 23 left. And so it's just really critical that we figure out how we can do this. What's the best way we can do things? How do we make minor adjustments? In the scenario where I had the F-16 out here on final and we had the aircraft on the go, this was a decision I made in the heat of the moment. I had told him to plan on making a south reentry, anticipating that I was going to need more time and this aircraft was not going to be ready, especially he's a T-38. They're not always ready to go right away for close traffic. But I let him know that he could be number one inside of a F-16 7 mile or 6 mile final if he could make present position close for a close left base for runway 23 left. And he said he could. So I gave it to the pilot to let him know, hey, look, this is the traffic scenario. Can you do this? And we had to get about 20 knot headwind. So that's another thing to note. That was really important. I could have given you guys the information ahead of time. But I had 20 knot wind this direction. So when this aircraft was on the go, or basically when he's on base and then on the go, he was going very fast. 20 knots faster than he probably would normally have been. So that helped me actually be able to make this happen. Because the aircraft on final was going about 20 knots slower than he normally goes on ground speed. The difference between ground speed and airspeed. We'll probably have an episode where maybe we talk about that specifically, what the difference is. I guess we can talk about it now. We got a little bit of time. So what ground speed and airspeed is if we have an airframe. I'm not an artist, so don't make fun of me. We have an airframe, and we have the wind blowing over that aircraft. This is airspeed. Okay? Ground speed is, if this is the ground, how fast he's covering distance on the ground. So we'll just say, for sake of argument, this aircraft is going 200 KTS or knots across the ground. Let me get rid of this. Okay, 200 knots airspeed. But we have a 20 knot headwind. Okay, the actual airspeed, if this aircraft, it'll still be 200 knots, but ground speed is going to be less. So ground speed is going to be the airspeed minus the headwind. So what we're going to be left up with ground speed is going to be 180 knots. Okay, so aircraft have a certain amount of airspeed that they need to maintain to stay airborne. Not the ground speed. The ground speed does not matter. They need airspeed to stay airborne. Okay, so what that means with the tailwind, if we flip this aircraft around, oh, it's terrible. Okay, that's our airplane now. So now they're going through the air and they have a 20 knot tailwind. Okay, so normally what they would need, we'll just say that they needed 200 knots to stay airborne, airspeed. So now with the 20 knot tailwind, he now has to go 220 knots to stay airborne. That means his ground speed is going to be even higher, right? So his ground speed is going to be, well, actually his ground speed will actually be the same. So his ground speed will be 220 knots because he doesn't have a headwind. Okay, so he'll be 220 knots. So in our scenario that we had with the aircraft on the runway, I'll bring this back, is he was going about 20 knots faster on final. Okay, so he was going 20 knots faster. Sorry, he was going 20 knots faster on the go. And then we had the F-16 on final right here, and he was going minus 20 knots. Okay, so he was plus 20 knots more than normal, minus 20 knots more than normal. That means there's a 40 knot difference. That's a pretty big difference in our pattern. That's what allowed me to give him his present position closed to be inside that F-16. I hope that was understandable and digestible and didn't confuse you guys too much. Thank you for joining me on this episode, and hope you guys learned something.